So now we have about 10 to 15 minutes to take some questions from you guys. Anything you've ever wanted to ask about writing your first book? Yes, right there in the back.
Could you come up to the microphone though? Because we are recording.
Make the long walk up to the front.
Yeah. You're going to be
She's a
singing.
lady.
What would be your biggest tips for submitting to a publisher? Because like part of the reason I don't even start sometimes, like I have all these ideas, but it's, okay, so say you get to the end and you finish, like, well, then what do you do with it? So then it's like, why put yourself through all of this, like, to write this book if you don't even know what you would do once you've finished it? Like, you just put it on a bookshelf, you ask somebody to look at it and hang out. Like, I mean, how do you even start the process to submit? Which I know seems jumping ahead, but for me, like, that's my roadblock, because it's like, well, why go through it if I don't even know what I would do once I finished?
So the first thing that I do after I finish a book is I do give it to someone, because there's this whole writing thing where you can't write in a box, right? You have to let people see it. So I always have a group of alpha readers, and I don't edit it at all. It's hot garbage. It's full of bad sentence fragments. It's full of typos. I do an F7 spell check, and that's it. Here you go. And I just tell them, just look at the big things. Don't fix my sentences. And I just hand it off to them, and I give them a month. And then I usually just write something else. That way you always have something working. Like when it is on submission, you already have something else you're working on. And then when they give it back to you, get back to me in this scenario, then I fix all the things. Because like there's revisions have to happen, right? So I fix all the things, and then I usually send it out again and tell people, like, tell me what's wrong with my sentences. And after that's done, then I consider it about clean enough for submission. So when you submit, most publishers, if you want to be traditionally published, will not take an unsolicited manuscript. You have to have an agent first. So you're going to actually focus on agents before you focus on publishers. And the biggest thing to do, and like you can literally just Google agents, whatever genre you have. So adult horror agents, and they'll just pop up a whole bunch, or young adult fiction contemporary agents, and it'll show you people who rep that stuff. But every agent and every publisher is going to have a different submission guideline, so you just have to go to their website and read what they have. Some people just want a query letter. Some people want a query letter and a synopsis or the full manuscript. And then it's like, well, what's a query letter? Google. Like, Google really, that sounds really stupid for me to say, but you can really Google a lot of things and figure out how stuff works. And again, not writing in a box. It's like, send that query letter when you write. It's basically the back cover of the book. Send it to your friends. Say, how can I make this better? How can I make this stronger? And they'll rip it apart for you, and you fix it, and then you just get that package together and you submit it. But you have to look up who you're submitting to, because everybody wants something different.
Yeah, my advice is this, and it's going to sound really difficult, but I promise you it will be pleasurable for you. I would go, whatever genre you're going to submit, like if you've written a young adult novel or an epic fantasy novel or a mystery novel, I would go to Barnes & Noble, and I would pick up every single book on the shelf in that category and look through the acknowledgement page of that book and see if the author has acknowledged his agent.
Most do.
Okay, most of them will. And you can collect a list of about 25 agents that are going to show up over and over in different writers. And that's how I did it. A couple things that are good about this is you're going to be in a bookstore, you're going to be looking at a lot of books, you're going to find a lot of agents, and you're also going to be exposed to every single book that you're going to be competing against, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of cool books that you might want to read, and you can buy them. So it's the best way to do it. And it's not going to take you that long, I promise you. You'll spend more time fishing around on Google than you can just go to the bookstore and figure this out.
Along with that, it's really important, like whatever way that you take, whatever works for you as far as finding names of agents, it is really good to go and read the books that they represent so that you know what they like. Like I remember when I was querying, I had this one agent in my head that I wanted for some reason, and she rejected my manuscript. Like, she actually wrote back to me. Most don't. They just ignore you, which is really, really good for your self-esteem, by the way. I actually read one of the books that she represents, and I was like, oh, you like not the kind of YA fantasy and sci-fi that I write, like not even a little bit. And so there's a lot of variation and like subjectivity even within genres. So it's really good to do research that's beyond just like their bio and what they represent, but like actually knowing what they like.
Thank you so much. Great question. Next question.
I have a stylistic choice question that if you're writing in third person close, do you like to see it going into first person in italics for that person's direct thoughts, or is that kind of passé or a no-no right now?
You know, every writer is going to do that different, because if you look at some of Stephen King's novels, the inner dialogue the character has is not in italics in some of the books, but then in other Stephen King novels, it's in italics. So even just that one author has done it differently, and that might be a stylistic choice that his publisher made, because each publishing house has a kind of a style guide they go by, and they kind of are married to it no matter how much you hate it. You
Yeah,
guys
so it
probably
doesn't
know.
matter. The publisher's going to change it for you anyway.
It's true.
But what about the switch from going from third person to first person in their thoughts?
I always do italics because I feel like it's less confusing that way. But
Yeah.
do what makes you happy. Put like 3 brackets around it.
I
Don't
think
do that.
as long as it's obvious what is happening in the prose, then you're fine. Like as long as your readers say that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question too. Purple shirt here.
My question's a follow-on question to that, not so much about when you use italics and how you do it, but the balance of when you reveal what's going on by doing a first-person narrative, their thoughts, and when you reveal it through their dialogue. What are the, don't do it in dialogue like you mentioned about, don't say I feel this, I feel that, but what do you keep private and reveal in personal thoughts, and then what do you manifest through dialogue, and how do you keep the balance between the interaction between what actually is expressed and what is going on?
That is a super hard question.
That's the problem with a question like that is like it depends on the story, it depends on the characters, it depends on what's happening right now. Because if we have this girl on a bus who, now that if I read it the way that she's like some secret agent, that makes it really interesting. She could get on the bus and be like, I'm a secret agent, I'm gonna find out about this guy, like internally, and she wouldn't go up to someone and be like, I'm a secret agent, like not in dialogue. She would never do that, right? Because that would ruin everything. It really just depends on what is right for the story and what is right for the scene. Because if you're writing a scene and like talking something out or blatantly stating something just doesn't feel right, then don't do it. Like at least the way I go, it's all by feel. It's not something I actively think about. It's just what feels right. So I don't know if there's a really
Yeah,
great
it's
answer
an
to that.
intuitive thing that you learn kind of over a course of writing a lot and reading a lot. Specifically reading a lot. I would take some of your favorite novelists that you're trying to maybe emulate, and I would take a few of their books and really dissect them like they're, you're taking a test on it. That's what I did with when I started writing my epic fantasy. I grabbed the first Game of Thrones book, the first Wheel of Time book, the Tad Williams' first Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn book, and I actually studied how these guys were revealing exactly those kind of things and when they were doing it, and making notes and comparing the different authors.
The only thing I would add is that the books that are easiest to read have an even balance of those things, of blocking and of internal thought and of dialogue. Each scene is different, but it's good to mix it up and not have a whole lot of just one.
Thank you. White unicorn suit.
Yes.
A unicorn.
I want to sing the Candy Mountain song, but I don't know it well enough because they say it so fast.
I won't embarrass you for that. Okay. I guess the question is, for particularly if you're starting out, how do you find the audience or the niche that for your writing, I guess?
Good question.
How do you find the audience? Are you talking about while you're writing,
Yeah.
writing to a genre?
Yeah,
or?
writing to a genre, finding how to write to a particular genre, audience, that sort of stuff. If that question makes sense.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, which is really obvious, is like if you're reading a lot in that genre, it's going to become pretty intuitive to you. When it comes to audience, so another thing that comes to my mind is like people who write middle grade or people who write young adult are like, oh, if I'm writing to these people, I better dumb down everything I'm writing, and that's not anything you ever want to do. Usually it's more content anyway. It's not like simplicity of prose. And so in that case, like, don't worry about it. Just write what you want to write. And honestly, I mean, you could even start out, I'm going to write an adult horror, and then halfway through, you're like, oh no, this is a romantic YA. Just
I wanna
go
read
with
that
it,
book.
and then you could be like, guess what? The audience is now this, just however it comes out. And whether, if you're going to self-publish, you can do a lot of things with marketing analytics that'll tell you who would like that kind of book. And if you traditionally publish, they'll do it for you. So
Yeah. I think that while you are writing, write what you want. And then when you edit, figure out what the market wants.
Thank you. Next question. Over here.
you ready for his song? I wanna spend my lifetime loving you. Yes. Get it? Because it's so
By the way, I didn't mean to insult all the cosplayers in here when I said that they're selfies. I'm like,
Oh, of
I,
course not.
it's like, I enjoy the cosplays and people should do it. And I'm just like, if you come to a writing conference and all you do is cosplay, I think maybe you should do like you cosplayers are and come to the writing.
He feels threatened by you. That's why he's
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I'm prepared to die, Okay, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, so what I'm writing right now is actually a graphic novel, which is interesting because I've been writing novels as a hobby for a few years, but this is my first serious attempt at a graphic novel, which I don't know where any of the markets are for that kind of thing. Do you know where to find anything like that?
It's probably the same research process. I have friends who do that, and I think it's a pretty competitive market, just like any publishing. But just do your research and figure out what agents and what editors are interested in.
Yeah, go to
that
the
kind of stuff.
graphic novel section of the Barnes and Noble and look through those, and the address, the addresses to submit will just be right there.
And I
in
think
those books.
with a lot of these questions, like, we have, especially in Utah, we have such an amazing writing community. Like, we have so many, like, NaNoWriMo groups. We have League of Utah Writers. I don't know how many groups they have. There's such an amazing writing community here and online that you can easily, I bet if you look on Facebook for graphic novel writers, you could find one that has 2,000 people, and you can go in there and they'll be like, here's all your information. And it'd be so nice. We have such a great community, and I think for anybody, we should always be tapping into that.
Yeah, you don't want to write alone or draw.
Definitely, thank you.
Awesome, great question. Next question. Over here, brown shirt.
You guys can line up too if you want, unless you don't want to
Too sexy
stand.
We have about time for probably one
sexy
more
for my
question
shirt.
after this.
Too sexy, it hurts. Is that sexual harassment?
You're just singing it to the whole room, so
Okay,
you're sexually
yes,
harassing
I'm singing it
everybody.
to the whole room.
I was just curious what your individual methodologies were for structuring your plot or doing your outlines, or what works for you.
I think for me, I have a cool idea. Usually it comes from like a scary dream or something. And then I come up with my characters and I come up with like the things that they want, the reason they can't have it, and what will happen to them if they can't have it. And then I come up with a plot from there. I'll come up with like how they get to their end goal and all the obstacles and bad people who get in their way. And I'll write all of that out, and then I write my book, and it usually ends up nothing like the outline, but that's how I start.
So my methodology has changed a lot as I've written, but from when I got published, I was like, let's try it this way, and then suddenly I got published, so I'm assuming it's good. So the two books I would recommend, at least for doing it my way, are How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy by Orson Scott Card, and then Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, which is a screenwriting book, which is great for novels. Just ignore his page numbers. He'll say, oh, you have to do this by page 30, but screenplays are a lot shorter than novels, so you don't have to actually do that by page 30.
It's like a percentage thing.
Yeah. Well, so what I do, so Orson Scott Card talks about how you have to create, this is for fantasy novels, you have to create your setting first, because depending on what your setting is will affect your characters and who your characters are, and who your characters are will affect the plot. So go setting, character, plot. So usually I will start with, I start with a magic system. Like, I get an idea for a magic system. It might be world-based, it might not be. And I think, well, that's really interesting. And then I flush out the magic system, and I think, what kind of people would use this magic? What kind of world would have this magic? And from there on, I follow that tier of Orson Scott Card. And when I have enough of an idea to see a story coming out, that's when I go to Save the Cat and I storyboard everything and post-it notes on my wall. And then I can see the holes where I'm missing things in plot, or you can color code things like, oh, character 1 is green and character 2 is blue. And it's like, there's no character 2 in all of Act 3. That's a problem. And then it just lets me visualize it. And once that's done, I can write an outline and write the book.
I pretty much, how does George R.R. Martin say there's writers who just do it on the fly, and then those who are
The gardeners and the
Pantsers.
architects,
the pantsers and the gardeners?
pantsers and the
Outliners.
outliners.
Is what I go by.
So I don't know which is which, but I pretty much, for the novels that I've written, I pretty much just, the first half of them, I just kind of flew by the seat of my pants and meandered around through it until I figured out that, hey, there is an actual plot in this. And about halfway through, I'm like, yeah, there is an actual plot kind of running through this, and maybe I need to kind of focus a little bit more on it and narrow it down and figure out how this is going to end. And then, so then I've got half the book written, and then I kind of plot out the rest of it, like where all these threads are going to, kind of like that show Lost, like, do you remember watching Lost when about halfway through it, you're like, man, they've got like 7,000 plot threads that they've introduced. How are they going to tie it all together? That's kind of the way I wrote my books. But then once you start outlining the rest of it, you can realize which things you can eliminate and all of that stuff you wrote previous, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. You go back and like reverse outline your first
Yeah.
half. Yeah. Awesome.
That's fantastic. Okay, we have one more minute for a really short question right here, gray shirt.
I'm blanking on songs. A, B, C, D.
So when you're writing a story that jumps between genres, where do you go to find an interest for that?
Genre jumping is hard. A lot of times, if you jump genres too much, you do have to self-publish, because the issue with that with traditional publishing is that the bookseller doesn't know what shelf to put it on. So, referring to Dan Wells again, he wrote a book, it was fantastic, called A Night of Blacker Darkness. It was satire, and it was historical, and it was adventure, and it was horror. It was like so many things, and his agent couldn't sell it, because like, well, where do we put this? So he did self-publish that one. I don't even remember what the question was. I'm just going to
How do you jump
play with
genres?
How do you jump genres? I mean, that's hard. I mean, he has his book, so it's doable, because what's his first book called? I Am Not a Serial Killer, right? It starts out as like a contemporary, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's like fantasy, and you had no idea it was coming. And it makes some people angry, and some people are like, whoa, this is amazing. So it can be done, but it is definitely tricky. I think foreshadowing, if you're going to suddenly introduce like a new genre, like, oh, guess what, now there's spaceships, foreshadowing that something of that could happen could help ease the reader into it. Somebody else say something smart.
David Weber jumped genres with his Safehold series, where it's literally like a third of it is straight up space opera, and then the other 2/3 of it are straight up epic fantasy. But it makes sense the way he's written it. And so that's, maybe one. I know with my epic horror novel, it was kind of like, it was a cross between horror, serial killer, Friday Night Lights, football, Big Love, HBO series. It was a cross genre. I mean, I tried to like put everything I could think of into
Now
that
we know
novel.
why it was 330,000 words.
I mean, it had Mormon polygamists, it had high school football players, it had Indian folklore, it had like serial killers and gold miners and cowboys and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It had everything.
That's called a kitchen sink novel.
Yeah.
I think that it's actually a really good idea to take something that is not familiar in one genre and to put it in that genre. Like just a while ago, people started doing heist books that were fantasy. Or like, I mean, you can do cross-genre stuff as long as it's really solidly in one genre. I mean, you can write whatever you want, especially if you're willing to self-publish. But
I mean, that's what Firefly was, right?
Yeah,
They took
exactly.
Western and put it into science fiction.
And
But
people
overall,
love
it's
it.
still science fiction. It wouldn't be classified as a Western.
if you have like an overall, like, this is definitely where the book sits, then you're fine.
Awesome, great question, thank you. And that is all the time we have, so we're gonna go ahead and close out, but thank you, Charlie and Brian, for coming on the show. We loved having you. Our next episode will be a little different than usual. We will be doing query critiques with a panel of current literary agents. If you would like a query critique, send us what you've got by April 29th. We'll be choosing 10 and we'll give hot takes hashtag 10 query style. Remember, you can watch the video feed of this recording on YouTube, or you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us ratings, reviews, and comments. It helps others to find the show. If you want to ask us questions or complain about life, the world, and everything, you can find us on Twitter at LitService or on Facebook and Instagram at LitServicePodcast, or you can email us at litservicepodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks this episode to our intern, Chelsea Mortensen, and our sound designer and video wrangler, Jason Akinaka. Lit Service is brought to you by Writers Clearinghouse. Writers Clearinghouse empowers authors and agents by providing low-cost professional evaluations of entire manuscripts that tell you exactly where your manuscript stands and what you can do to improve it. To learn more, visit www.writersch.com. Listeners of Lit Service will receive 20% off an evaluation by using the code LITService20 at purchase. For Lit Service, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.